Lesson 24, Section 3. This presentation will be talking about three pronouns. Tis, ti, the indefinite pronoun of the same letters with different accents, and the pronoun has, tis, he, tis, hate. The basic word for who, which, what in Greek is tis, ti, a very important pronoun. Like the pronoun who in English, tis is declined according to case, number, and gender. So, for instance, who in English changes to whom in the objective and whose in the possessive cases. So that's a pretty simple declension. Tis, of course, is quite a bit more complex, but it shows the same kinds of changes that we see in English. Its declension is that of a third declension adjective. That is, it has the same forms for both masculine and feminine. It has some different forms for the neuter. So it's effectively a two-termination third declension adjective like elpron. So this is the chart for it. We've got tis, ti, genitive is tinos, who or what. So as usual, to get our stem, we drop the os of the genitive singular, which leaves us tin. We plug that. Here we're just going to start with the masculine, feminine. We add our normal third declension endings here. And as we often see, especially with third declension nouns, adjectives of this type, that is with a stem ending in new, we've got sound changes. The new sigma in both the nominative singular and the dative plural change to just sigma. So that's where we get the tis in the nominative singular and the tisse or tissin in the dative plural. Now, for the neuter, of course, we have this in the lexical form up above. The tis, ti, that ti is the neuter form. So we plug that into the neuter nominative singular and the neuter accusative singular. For the plural, we'll want to take our normal stem, tin, and then we're going to add our ending. It's going to be the same as we saw for other third declension neuter adjectives. Just that alpha there. Happens to be the same as the accusative singular for masculine and feminine. So these are the forms of tis, ti, genitive tinos, who, what, can also mean which. We'll see its uses next. Use of tis. At its most basic, this word is used interrogatively. That is, as a question word. This is the interrogative pronoun, the interrogative use. So for instance, tis lexe, who will speak? Who will speak? This is nominative singular, masculine or feminine. Could be either. We're referring to one person, and we're asking who this one person who is going to speak is. We can also say, tis humon lexe, which of you will speak? Literally, who of you, but that's not English idiom, so we would translate this as which of you will speak. Humon is the genitive plural, second person plural personal pronoun, y'all, which of y'all will speak. We could also say tine lexe. Here this is the dative singular, masculine or feminine form, also neuter. Whom will he speak to? So this person who's going to be speaking, to whom or whom will he speak to? We would put this in the dative case because it would be the indirect object of our speaking. And we could also ask ti lexe, what will he say? This could also mean literally, because the ti here is the same in the nominative and accusative. It could be what will speak, but in context, that's probably not likely. So what will this person who is going to speak say? Ti lexe. It's the accusative, neuter, singular form of our word tis. So all these are questions, and word order in questions is not always like this in Greek. We have flexibility, but very frequently we'll start these questions with our question word, tis, with that question word. And of course we have the semicolon at the end. These are direct questions, of course. We'll see a little bit later how indirect questions are handled or can be handled. In the accusative, till can also mean with respect to what or why. The accusative singular, really. Though tinna, the accusative plural, can also mean with respect to what things. But this is a very, very common idiom. To use ti as why, in fact, in some ways it's the most basic way of asking why something is or is not the case. So for instance, ti tauta lexe. Here we have ti, just like we saw up above. We have lexe, but we also have another object of our speaking. So the tauta is really also the accusative, and it can mean literally these things, but also just this. So why will he say this? Or why will he say these things? Ti here is really an accusative of respect. We have two accusatives in this little sentence here. But we want to think of it typically when we see it in a construction like this where we already have another object, just as meaning why. It's very common. Now, let's switch gears a little bit. The indefinite pronoun tis, ti, it's the same except, well, this pronoun is formed exactly like the interrogative pronoun tis, except that it is an enclitic. That is, it does not normally have an accent. And this is the way to tell these two apart. This is not a question word. We're not using it in direct questions, indirect questions. It's an indefinite pronoun. We'll talk about what that means. But first of all, we have to be able to tell them apart. Usually, one will have the accent, the interrogative, the who or why or what. The other one, this one, will not. As an enclitic, it also does weird things to the accent of the words that come before it. Occasionally, it'll have an accent itself if it's followed by an enclitic. On its own or modifying a noun, it has generic force and can be translated a or an, some or someone, some or something. So we're not talking about any one or anything in particular. In English, we might use the indefinite article, a or an or a, in translating it. For example, lexe tis, someone will speak. Note that our word order is different. We're never going to see this indefinite pronoun be the first word in a sentence, unlike the question word, tis, ti. And also note it does not have the accent. Lexe tis. It's not a question either. So there are really three clues that this is the indefinite pronoun and not the interrogative pronoun. So lexe tis, someone will speak. We're not too particular about who that person will be. Someone will speak. Lexe tis hemon. Literally, someone of us will speak, but that's not good English idiom, so we would translate it as one of us will speak. Someone from among us will speak. Lexe tis poietes. Here, tis agrees with poietes in number, case, and gender. So it's been used kind of as an adjective, almost. A poet will speak. Some poet, a poet, any poet. We're not quite sure who the identity is, or the identity isn't important. We know that a poet will be speaking. Lexe te kalan. And that poet will say something fine. A fine thing, we might also say. Lexe te kalan. We could have just said lexe kalan. Could also be translated the same way. Here, we have just made it a little clearer what we're talking about. Lexe te kalan. He'll say something fine. So someone, one, something, an, a. These are all different ways, many different ways of capturing the meaning of this word. Now, this is our final pronoun for today. The pronoun hastis, hetis, hate. This pronoun is a combination of has plus tis, I don't know if you can tell, and it has two main uses. So it's basically the relative pronoun, has, not the definite article, and tis, which we just saw the forms of a few slides back. It has two main uses. The first, it can be used indefinitely to mean who or whatever. And we've seen another way of of saying this, who or whatever, we've seen indefinite clauses with the relative pronoun plus un plus subjunctive, and that's what we're going to see here. Just a refresher, aku amen ha unlegos in hoitikaioi. This we would translate as something like, we listen to whatever the just say. So we have our relative pronoun, it's neuter plural, nominative accusative in this case, plus our little particle un, and our subjunctive, our present subjunctive, legos, and that lengthened omega there. Now this is one way to say whatever, whoever, whomever, but another way to do that, to say the same thing, is to use the correct form of hostis, hetis, hate. So we need to find the correct form of that is basically also neuter plural nominative accusative. So that is ha tinna. So ha is the same, and then tinna is that same form of ti, declined. And also we see that we do not use the subjunctive here. We use the indicative, the normal endings. But the meaning is the same. We listen to whatever the just say. This is a little less common than the indefinite clause, than the use of the subjunctive that we've seen, but we do see it. The second use of this pronoun is that it can be used instead of tis, or ti, in indirect questions. So let's look at a direct question first that we've seen. Tis lexe, who will speak? Now, if we wanted to say something like, tell me who will speak, then we need to, or we can recast the sentence a little bit. In Greek, we actually don't need to do much. If we don't want to, we could just say, lege moi tis lexe, tell me who will speak. Lege moi, tell me, tis lexe. Basically, this is exactly the same in form as the direct question. This is an indirect question because it's not really a question. It's a statement that includes a question word, who. Another thing we can do here, though, instead of using tis, we can use the corresponding form of hostis. And hostis is the corresponding form in this case. So it would be lege moi hostis lexe. Tell me who will speak. Again, the translation is exactly the same. Here, however, this is the more common way of expressing this indirect question. Now let's look really quickly at the forms of this, because there are one or two alternative forms that you might see. So these are the forms of the relative pronoun, has, he, ha, who, or which. We see these in relative clauses. We see these in indefinite clauses. And we're going to form hostis, hetis, hate, simply by adding to these the corresponding forms of tis, ti. And these are the forms we've seen. And that's really all there is to it. We don't change any of the accents or the breathing marks. We do change our sigmas to intervocalic sigmas, I believe they're called. Basically the sigma that we see inside of words. So not much going on there. There are some alternative forms we might see, though. The most important are in the nominative singular neuter and the accusative singular neuter. Instead of hate, what we might see, because this is, hate can also mean that or because, so there's ambiguity here. To resolve this ambiguity, Greek sometimes puts a space in between. So instead of hate without the space, we see hate. Means the same thing. It's this pronoun, this form of hostis, which we see again in indefinite statements. Whatever is one way to translate this. We also see it to mean what in indirect questions. We also have alternative forms, as we saw for those irregular comparative adjectives. So these are the irregular forms. In every case, they're basically contractions. They're leaving out some letters, make them a little easier to pronounce, a little easier to write, shorter. And these are common enough. you want to know where to find them and what they might mean. So these are the forms, the typical forms and the alternative forms of hastis, hetis, hate, who, whoever, what, whatever. For the endings, you want to look at pages 48 and 50 for all of these. You want to you'll probably be using these charts quite a bit, so know where they are. And for further reading, I would encourage you to look at page 149, where you read more about the indefinite pronoun tis and te and its different uses. Thank you very much.